He thought he was a father to one child. Until he opened the envelope that proved he had two twins. But only one had been given his name. The other had been hidden, discarded, left to grow up alone in a place where no one ever came to visit. And the cruelest part? The surrogate didn't lose the little girl. She gave her away. Not because she didn't love her, but because she was born with a disability. And she believed Damien Blackthorne, the billionaire who demanded perfection in every part of his life, would never want a daughter who wasn't. Before we go any further, where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. Are you lying in bed, earbuds in, letting the story wash over you? Sitting in traffic with the world blurring past the window? Wherever you are, this story will stay with you. Because Damien Blackthorne wasn't just a powerful man, he was a man who had everything. Influence. Money. A legacy carved out in glass and steel. But in one moment, with 2 birth certificates staring back at him, he realized he had overlooked the only thing that mattered: truth. Alexander, his perfect heir, was living in luxury, while Lily, born with cerebral palsy, had been placed in a state-run orphanage. 5 years. No father. No birthday balloons. No bedtime kisses. Just silence and state reports. And at the bottom of that file, scrawled in simple black ink, was the line that made his blood run cold: "She chose the girl because she knew you wouldn't." All his life, Damien had controlled every outcome. Until now. Because now, he had a daughter. And he'd already failed her. Damien didn't sleep that night. He sat alone in his penthouse office, the city lights flickering below like artificial stars, and in his hand, he held 2 birth certificates that had already shattered everything he thought he knew. Twins. One he'd been told about, Alexander, the so-called miracle boy. Strong, healthy, gifted. The perfect heir. And the other, Lily. A little girl with cerebral palsy. A daughter he hadn't even known existed. He'd always prided himself on knowing everything, every detail, every threat, every opportunity. But somehow, the existence of his own child, had slipped through the cracks of his empire. He didn't ask for coffee. He didn't bark for his assistant. He just picked up the phone and called in the one thing he hated using unless absolutely necessary: a private investigator. "Find her," he said, voice low and cold. "And find the woman who gave her away." What came back changed everything. The surrogate's name was Hannah Wells. A former NICU nurse turned full-time caregiver. No criminal record. No lawsuits. No trail of gold-digging motives. Just quiet. Stable. Invisible. She lived in upstate New York with a boy, Alexander Blackthorne, age 5, enrolled in an elite private academy. Healthy. Thriving. Bright. And Lily? Damien's chest tightened as the report shifted. His daughter, his own flesh and blood, was living in a state-run care facility. 5 years old. No visitors on record. No family listed. And most haunting of all, under medical notes, a line that read: nonverbal. Severe spastic cerebral palsy. High emotional receptivity despite physical limitations. Damien didn't cry. He didn't even blink. He just stared at the screen like it had punched a hole in his chest. A billionaire used to multi-billion-dollar mergers. Now reduced to silence by a single word: daughter. The next morning, Damien arrived at Hannah's front door unannounced. His driver didn't even have time to open the door, he was already out, storming up the stone path, fists clenched. When she answered, she didn't look shocked to see him. In fact, she looked like she'd been waiting. "You knew," he said through gritted teeth. "You knew they were both mine." Hannah didn't flinch. Her voice was calm. Gentle. Steady. "Yes. I did." "And you gave one away." "No," she said softly. "I gave her a chance." Those words hit like glass. He was ready for a lie. Ready for an excuse. Ready for the usual guilt-drenched manipulation he dealt with in boardrooms every day. But not this. Not a quiet woman telling him that she chose the broken one. Because she believed he would. He wanted to argue. To call it unethical. Heartless. Cruel. But then, a sound echoed through the hallway. Laughter. A small boy came running around the corner. Freckled, curious, bright-eyed. And the moment he saw Damien, he stopped. Their eyes locked. And Damien saw it, his late wife's eyes staring back at him. Alexander looked up, confused. then softly asked, "Are you my daddy?" Damien didn't answer. Because in that moment, he wasn't sure who he was anymore. A father? A stranger? A monster who'd failed one child without ever knowing she existed? That night, he didn't go back to his hotel. He drove to the facility listed in Lily's file. And as he walked through the halls, sterile, quiet, haunting, he felt something strange blooming in his chest. Not guilt. Not fear. Grief. He hadn't lost a daughter. He'd never even had the chance to know her. Until now. The walls of the care facility weren't cold. Not in the way Damien had expected. They were warm. Quiet. Kind. Soft pastel murals lined the hallway. Volunteers moved gently through the rooms. It wasn't sterile, it was sad. A different kind of sadness. The kind that hums quietly in the background, like a lullaby with no words. A nurse led him to a small playroom at the end of the hall. "She's in here," she whispered. "She likes the window." And there, in a worn-out pink wheelchair, was Lily. Tiny. Fragile. Dark curls falling into her face as she clumsily held a crayon in one hand. The other hand? Curled tight against her chest, unmoving. She didn't look up right away. Damien stood there. Frozen. He didn't know what to say. What do you say to the daughter you didn't know you had? The daughter everyone assumed you wouldn't want? Then, suddenly, she looked up. Her eyes met his. And she smiled. Not a big smile. Not a perfect one. But it was there. Soft. Uncertain. Brave. And just like that, his heart cracked. Later that evening, back at Hannah's house, the conversation he had been dreading finally came. He sat across from her at the kitchen table, the same table where his son now ate cereal and giggled like life was simple. It wasn't. Damien's voice was low. Tight. "I want to understand. I need to hear it from you. Why? Did you choose her?" Hannah didn't answer right away. She folded her hands in her lap. Eyes fixed on the floor. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm. Wounded. Firm. "The clinic only let me implant one embryo. One." She paused. Looked up at him. "I had two choices. Two perfect beginnings. But only one space." Damien's jaw clenched. "And you picked the child who would suffer more?" Hannah shook her head slowly. "No. I picked the child who'd be loved less." Those words sank like stones in water. She continued, softer now. "I watched your interviews. I read your wife's will. I saw the way your life was engineered for perfection. For success. For performance. And when I looked at those two embryos, I asked myself, who would survive in your world?" Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. "The boy would thrive. He'd fit into your world without breaking it. But the girl? The girl needed someone who would build a world around her. And I knew. You wouldn't. Not then." Damien didn't speak. He couldn't. His hands shook beneath the table. He hadn't realized how tightly he was holding on to his own idea of who he was, what kind of father he'd have been. But the truth? Hannah had been right. Back then, he wouldn't have accepted Lily. Not because he was cruel, but because he was ignorant. Afraid. Focused on legacy instead of life. And Hannah? She hadn't abandoned one child. She had protected her. She had taken the one who was most vulnerable, and said, "I choose you anyway." Damien stood slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You robbed me of the chance to be her father." Hannah nodded. "I did. But I gave her the chance to be someone's daughter. That had to be enough. And for 5 years. It was. Damien didn't change overnight. You don't go from building billion-dollar empires to learning how to clean feeding tubes and stretch stiff limbs in a single day. But something had shifted in him, quietly, uncomfortably. It started with a choice. He didn't sign a check. He didn't send assistance. He showed up. Every day. At first, he just sat beside Lily in that sunlit room. He watched her color with crayons she could barely grip. He read articles about cerebral palsy on his phone, pretending not to panic over the medical jargon. And sometimes, he just sat in silence, listening to her soft breathing, the gentle clicks her wheelchair made as she moved. He didn't speak much. And neither did she. But every now and then, she would look at him, Those same deep eyes that haunted his dreams, and smile. Not because she had to. Not because she wanted something. Just because he was there. And slowly, that was enough. One afternoon, Damien was adjusting the tray on Lily's chair when she dropped her toy. Without thinking, he bent down to pick it up. And heard it. A sound. Soft. Faint. Almost missed it. A giggle. Lily was laughing. At him. He'd bumped his head on the edge of the tray trying to help, and instead of crying or flinching, she had laughed. It was the first time he'd ever heard it. And it hit him harder than any boardroom betrayal or hostile takeover. That laugh was his win. But transformation isn't always linear. At home, things were shifting too. Alexander had always been an easy child, sharp, well-mannered, bright. But now, he had questions. Why do you go see her so much? Damien hesitated. Because she's your sister. Alex tilted his head. 5 years old, but far too observant. You didn't know she was, before. Damien swallowed. I didn't. But I do now. And I want to be there for her. The boy went quiet. Then softly whispered. Does that mean you'll stop being there for me? That one cut deeper than he expected. He knelt beside his son and looked him in the eyes. No, Alex. Loving her doesn't mean I love you less. It just means I finally understand how to love more. At the facility, Damien began learning from the nurses. How to lift her without hurting her hips. How to feed her when her hands refused to work with spoons. How to read her expressions when words wouldn't come. And from Hannah, who had every reason to shut him out, he learned the rest. How to stretch her limbs gently when they locked up. How to calm her breathing during nighttime spasms. How to see Lily for who she was, not just what she couldn't do. One evening, after a particularly tough physical therapy session, Damien sat with Lily in her room. Her head was resting against his chest, exhausted. And for the first time, he said the words out loud, not for her, not for anyone else, but for himself. I don't know if I deserve you. But I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. And Lily? She didn't speak. Couldn't. But she reached up, slow and trembling, and rested her tiny hand on his. And for Damien Blackthorne, the man who once believed love was a liability, that was the moment he understood. This wasn't weakness. This was strength in its purest form. Fatherhood had never been part of Damien's blueprint. Legacy? Yes. Power? Always. But diapers, wheelchairs, storybooks, bedtime tears? That had never been in the forecast. And yet, here he was. Torn. Not between good and evil. But between two children, both his, both innocent. Both needing him in very different ways. At home, Alex had started to withdraw. The once bright boy who loved puzzles and bedtime jokes now lingered in doorways, watching quietly as his father practiced therapy exercises with Lily. He didn't say much. But his silence said everything. Damien tried to balance it, he really did. He brought Alex to the park. Helped with school projects. Read bedtime stories with dramatic voices and silly faces. But it wasn't the same anymore. Alex had seen something he didn't understand. You only take her to your work, he said one evening. Why not me? Because Lily needs more help right now, Damien replied gently. But I need help too, Alex whispered. And just like that, Damien's confidence shattered. Because he realized. Loving one child didn't come without cost to the other. And no matter how hard he tried, someone was always losing a little bit of him. Meanwhile, the board was growing impatient. Blackthorne Industries needed a clear successor. Shareholders didn't care about therapy sessions or playground visits. They wanted strategy, succession, security. They wanted an heir, not a heartbroken billionaire fumbling through fatherhood. Damien sat in his office late one night, the city lights dancing across the windows, the weight of a decision pressing on his chest like a stone. On one hand, he had Alex. Sharp. Brilliant. Healthy. Everything the board expected from a Blackthorne. The boy he could mold into a leader, just like he'd always planned. On the other, Lily. Vulnerable. Nonverbal. Medically complex. but with a strength that softened his heart every time she smiled. She couldn't take over his company, but she'd already taken over his soul. So, who would carry his name? The one built for it? Or the one who taught him what it meant? And then came the letter. He found it one evening while cleaning Lily's room, a small notebook under her pillow. Inside were scribbles. Shaky, uneven, barely legible, but unmistakably hers. Simple drawings. Stick figures. He recognized them, a tall man, a little boy, a girl in a chair. And underneath, scrawled in faint pencil, "Daddy doesn't love me. Because I'm broken." It knocked the air out of his lungs. Because those weren't just words on paper. They were the thoughts inside her quiet, smiling heart. She'd seen the difference. Felt it. Even if she couldn't speak it. He clutched the notebook, his hands trembling. And for the first time, Damien cried. Not tears of guilt. Not shame. But grief, for the man he had been. And the father he almost wasn't. He had once feared her disability would make her a burden. But now, he realized, it was his fear that had made him unworthy. Lily wasn't broken. She was whole in a way the world had never taught him to see. That night, Damien made a promise. Not just to Lily. Not just to Alex. But to himself. He wouldn't be the father who chose. He'd be the father who showed up. For both. Even if it meant rewriting everything. Even if it meant going against the empire he'd built. Even if it meant losing everything. To finally become something. A real dad. Redemption doesn't arrive all at once. It's not a grand gesture. Not a headline. Not a photo op. It's quieter than that. It's waking up early to pack 2 lunches instead of 1. It's taking a call from the boardroom while rubbing your daughter's back through a muscle spasm. It's learning that love isn't about fairness. It's about presence. And that's where Damien found himself, slowly, awkwardly. But genuinely stepping into fatherhood with both hands open. He made changes, real ones. The first? He converted the guest wing of his penthouse into a space built just for Lily. Not just ramps and railings. But soft light, calming textures, drawers she could open, books she could touch. He called in therapists, not to fix her, but to help him understand her. Speech specialists. Occupational aides. And a music teacher, because Lily lit up every time she heard piano keys. And one night, she tapped a key on her small keyboard and turned toward him, her smile wider than he'd ever seen. She couldn't say thank you. But he felt it, like sunlight breaking through fog. At the same time, Damien made space for Alex too. He took him to school in the mornings. Showed up for class presentations. Sat front row for the school play, even when Alex only had 2 lines and wore a crooked crown. And one night, as Damien tucked him into bed, Alex asked the question he'd been too afraid to voice before. Do you still love me the most? Damien didn't lie. He didn't say what was easiest. He sat on the edge of the bed, took his son's small hand, and said, I don't love anyone the most. I just love both of you. With everything I have. Alex nodded. And for the first time in weeks, he smiled. Damien began bringing Lily into his world too. Not out of guilt. But because he wanted her there. He took her to board meetings. Not to prove anything to anyone, but to let her see him work, to let her belong. And yes, at first, people whispered. Some stared. But he didn't care. She was his daughter. And when she scribbled Dad on her notepad and held it up during a presentation, he stopped the meeting, smiled, and said, Sorry, gentlemen. My most important shareholder just gave her approval. The room fell silent. And then, a round of applause. Redemption also meant revisiting the past. One rainy afternoon, Damien asked Hannah to meet him at the park, just the 3 of them. No lawyers. No drama. Just peace. Hannah was hesitant. Guarded. But when she saw the way Lily leaned against her father, arms curled gently around his wrist. Her shoulders softened. You became the man I hoped you could, she said quietly. Damien looked down at Lily, then back at Hannah. No. I became the man she believed I could. They sat there for a long time. No words. Just rain. Just breath. Just 3 people, trying to write a new story, together. And slowly, the world began to shift. Damien wasn't just known as a ruthless billionaire anymore. He was the man who showed up to disability fundraisers. The one who pushed his daughter's chair with quiet pride. The father who knelt beside his children, not above them. And in those still moments, as Lily rested her head on his shoulder, as Alex reached for his hand at school pickup, Damien realized something profound. All his life, he had fought for control. For precision. For power. But it was love, messy, unpredictable, inconvenient love, that had finally made him whole. It wasn't the grand gesture people expected. There were no fireworks. No press conferences. No polished statement from a PR team. Just Damien Blackthorne, standing quietly at the front of his corporate boardroom, holding the hand of the little girl who changed everything. The room was full, executives, advisors, investors, all waiting to hear what the reclusive billionaire had to say. They weren't used to seeing him in person anymore, let alone like this. No suit jacket. No polished speech. Just a calm presence. And a child by his side. Her pink wheelchair gleamed under the polished lights. Her dress had butterflies stitched into the hem. And her tiny hand was gripping his tightly. Damien stepped forward. Cleared his throat. "You all know me. You know what I've built. You know the numbers, the milestones, the patents, the projections." He looked around. Not at the spreadsheets or charts, but at their eyes. "But today, I want you to meet someone who taught me more than any market ever did." He turned toward her. Smiled. "This is Lily. My daughter. And she's the reason I'm no longer the man I used to be." There were gasps. A few murmurs. One stunned silence. "I used to believe that strength came from perfection. That legacy meant power. That only the strong should lead. But she taught me that love, real love, isn't loud or flawless or easy. It's quiet, unshakable, and worth everything." He crouched beside her. Helped her lift a notepad she had on her lap. The words were written in block letters with shaky hands. "I am not broken." And beneath it, in smaller scribbles, "I am loved." Someone in the room sniffled. Another stood slowly. Then another. Until the entire room rose to their feet. Not in pity. Not out of obligation. But in respect. After the meeting, Damien didn't stay to shake hands. He wheeled Lily to the elevator, whispering something that made her giggle behind her curls. As they descended, he glanced down and asked, "You know you changed everything, don't you?" She looked up at him, eyes bright. Then gently tapped her fingers over his heart. That was her way of saying yes. Later that evening, back at home, Damien tucked both kids into bed. Lily was curled against her favorite stuffed bear. Alex had insisted on one more story, even though he knew it by heart. And just as Damien stood to leave, Alex asked softly, "Is Lily your favorite?" Damien paused at the doorway. Then turned and smiled. "You both are. Just in different ways. And somehow, you both saved me." He turned out the lights. But the room didn't go dark. Because in their laughter, their presence, their quiet belonging, there was light. The kind he'd never found in boardrooms or bank accounts. Damien Blackthorne had spent a lifetime building a legacy. But it wasn't made of steel or screens or money anymore. It was made of a little boy with too many questions. And a little girl who didn't need to speak, to be heard. She didn't change the company. She didn't change the world. She changed him. And that was more than enough. She was never supposed to be part of the story. Not in the boardroom. Not in the headlines. Not in the legacy Damien Blackthorne had spent his whole life building. And yet, somehow, she became the very center of it. Lily never spoke a single word. But the way she smiled? The way she held her father's hand with quiet trust? She said more with silence than most of us say with a lifetime of talking. It's easy to love what fits. What makes sense. What's neat, clean, expected. But what about when life hands you something different? Something that slows you down. Something that asks more of your heart than your mind. Would you still choose love? Hannah did. When faced with a choice between two embryos, one that could thrive in a billionaire's world, and one that would struggle, she chose the one no one else would have picked. Not because it was easy. Not because she had to. But because she believed the child who'd be loved the least deserved to be loved the most. And because of that one brave choice, a man changed. A brother learned compassion. And a little girl found a home she was never supposed to have. So now I want to ask you something. And be honest with yourself, more than with me. If you were the one standing there, two lives in your hands, would you have chosen the same? Let us know in the comments. We read them. We feel them. And sometimes, the way your story connects with someone else's, that's where the real magic happens. And hey, if this story stirred something in you, even just for a moment, hit that subscribe button and join us here at Heartfelt Tales TV. We tell stories that stay with you long after they end. Stories that make you pause, reflect, maybe even tear up a little. Because the world could use more softness, more empathy, more truth. So if you felt something today, stick around. We've got more stories just like this, waiting to find the right heart. Yours.